The road from San Antonio to El Paso stretched like a pale scar across the vast Texas frontier, cutting through mesquite scrub, dry creek beds, and miles of unforgiving, sunburned earth. It was a road that had swallowed men whole, swallowed their money, their horses, and sometimes their lives. Freight wagons traveled it in groups when they could. Stagecoaches rode armed, and anyone with sense kept a rifle close and their prayers closer. On that blazing afternoon, a lone carriage rolled steadily westward, its rimmed wheels crunching over hard, packed dirt. Dust curled behind it like smoke from a slow, burning fuse. Two powerful black horses pulled the vehicle with disciplined rhythm, their muscles rippling beneath glossy coats. At the reins sat a woman. She wore a broad, brimmed hat pulled low against the sun and a fitted riding jacket the color of storm clouds. Her gloved hands held the leather lines with calm precision. A Winchester rifle lay within reach beside her seat, polished but well used. Her posture was straight, her gaze steady. Her name was Evelyn Eve Mercer. Most folks who saw her carriage assumed she was either reckless or foolish. Women did not typically drive alone through bandit country. Women certainly did not haul locked iron, bound chests in the back. But Eve Mercer had long ago stopped caring what most folks thought. She had grown up on a ranch outside San Antonio, the only child of a father who believed daughters should know how to survive just as well as sons. Her father, Thomas Mercer, had once ridden as a scout during the last years of frontier skirmishes. He'd taught her to track a deer across rocky soil, to mend tack, to reload in the dark, and most importantly, to shoot from horseback. You never know when you won't have the luxury of standing still, he used to say. By the time she was 15, she could knock a tin cup off a fence post at 100 yards while her horse ran full tilt. By 23, she had buried her father and taken over his small freight business. The carriage she drove now carried silver coin destined for a bank in El Paso. It was not a secret shipment, rumors traveled fast across saloons and poker tables. But Eve had not been able to gather a full escort on short notice. The bank had needed the transfer quickly, and Eve had never been one to back down from risk. She scanned the ridgeline ahead. Too quiet. The cicadas hummed in the brush, but even the birds seemed absent. The horses flicked their ears nervously. Eve loosened the leather strap securing her rifle. The first shot cracked from the rocks above like a whip splitting the air. The bullet tore through the brim of her hat. The second struck the dirt near the horse's hooves. The animals reared in panic, screaming, but Eve's hands remained steady on the reins. "Easy now," she murmured. 4 riders burst from behind a rocky outcrop, faces masked with dark bandanas, revolvers flashing in the sun. Another 2 thundered up from the rear, cutting off retreat, bandits, and from the look of their horses and weapons, experienced ones. The leader rode a tall gray mare and carried himself with easy arrogance. His hat was tilted low, but she could see the curl of a smirk beneath his bandana. "Well now," he called out, circling closer, "ain't this a surprise? Didn't expect such a pretty sight driven a treasure wagon." Eve did not answer. Her eyes calculated distance, wind direction, horse speed. They believed she would freeze. They believed she would plead. One of them moved closer to grab the reins. That was his mistake. Eve snapped the reins sharply, urging the horses forward. The carriage lurched into motion, wheels rattling violently as it barreled down the road. The bandits gave chase, laughter echoing behind her. "Don't let her run," the leader shouted. Eve stood up on the driver's bench, bracing her boots against the wood frame as the carriage bounced dangerously beneath her. She grabbed the Winchester in one smooth motion. Most people needed stillness to aim. Eve needed rhythm. The horse's gallop fell into a pattern: thunder, thunder, thunder. She matched her breath to it. The first bandit closed in on her left side, raising his revolver. Without sitting down, without slowing, Eve twisted at the waist and fired. The shot rang sharp and true. The man's hat exploded off his head, and the bullet tore into his shoulder. He toppled from his saddle, hitting the dirt hard. The others faltered in shock. "She's shootin'," one yelled, at full gallop. Eve shifted her weight, sighting the next rider through bouncing motion. The carriage wheels struck a rut, but she compensated instinctively. She squeezed the trigger again. Another rider's horse screamed as the bullet struck the ground inches from its hooves. The animal reared violently, throwing its rider into the brush. The leader's smirk vanished, spread out. He barked. They hadn't expected resistance, least of all from a woman driving alone. Eve felt a fierce, steady calm settle over her. Fear had no place here, only precision. A rider moved in from the right, aiming carefully this time. She ducked as a bullet grazed her sleeve, tearing fabric and drawing a thin line of blood across her arm. Pain sharpened her focus. She let the reins wrap around her forearm, trusting the horses to maintain their line for a few heartbeats. She raised the rifle again and fired low. The bullet struck the man's revolver hand. His weapon flew into the dust. 3 left. The leader spurred his gray mare forward, gaining ground. "You're mackin' this harder than it needs to be," he shouted. Eve reloaded smoothly, ejecting the spent casing with practiced ease. "You picked the wrong carriage," she called back coolly. He charged straight toward her flank, hoping to intimidate, to force her into a mistake. Instead, she did something none of them anticipated. She leapt, not off the carriage, but onto the back of one of the lead horses. In a single fluid motion, she abandoned the driver's bench and swung into the saddleless back of the left black stallion, gripping with her knees as the carriage thundered behind. Now she was no longer bound by the vehicle's frame. Now she rode free. The bandit's eyes widened. She fired again, this time with even greater control. Another rider spun sideways and fell. 2 remained, the leader and one younger man hanging back uncertainly. The younger one hesitated, and hesitation was fatal. Eve's next shot knocked his revolver clean from his grasp. He wheeled his horse away and fled. Silence fell heavy, except for pounding hooves and rattling wheels. Only the leader remained. He studied her now with something like respect. "Well," he said, pulling his horse alongside at a dangerous closeness, "ain't you full of surprises?" Eve aimed directly at his chest. He laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You won't shoot." She fired. The bullet tore through the sleeve of his coat and grazed his ribs. Blood darkened the fabric instantly. He cursed, losing balance for a split second. She could have aimed for his heart. She chose not to. Instead, she shifted her rifle toward the rocky ledge ahead and fired at a weak overhang of stone she'd noticed when the ambush began. The shot cracked the unstable rock. A cascade of stones tumbled down between them, forcing his horse to rear violently. Eve used the distraction to pull the horses hard left, guiding the carriage off the main trail and into a narrow ravine she knew from previous journeys. The path was too tight for multiple riders to follow side by side. The leader attempted pursuit, but slowed, blood soaking through his coat. "You ain't seen the last of me," he shouted. Eve did not look back. She rode hard for another mile before slowing, breath finally catching up with her. Her arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed it. Sweat mixed with dust across her face, but the carriage remained intact. The silver remained secure, and she remained alive. By the time she reached the outskirts of El Paso, word had already traveled faster than her wheels. A ranch hand who'd witnessed the distant gunfire had ridden ahead to town. When she rolled onto the main street, faces turned. The sheriff stepped out of his office, hat tilted back. "You the one who just outran half of Calder's gang?" he asked. "Looks like less than half now," Eve replied evenly. "Calder." Someone whispered. The name belonged to Marcus Calder, a notorious outlaw who'd plagued trade routes for years. If she'd wounded him, she had done more than defend a carriage. She had humiliated a legend. Inside the bank, the manager stared wide-eyed at the bullet hole in her hat. "You made it alone?" he asked. Eve nodded. "Told you I would." Later that evening, as the sun sank red behind adobe rooftops, the sheriff approached her again. "You know Calder won't take kindly to this," he warned. Eve cleaned her rifle methodically. "Men like him never do. You might consider stayin' in town a while. Let us post deputies." She considered it, then she shook her head. "I've got freight due back east." The sheriff studied her, then gave a low whistle. "You ride like the devil himself." She allowed a faint smile. "My father taught me." That night, alone in a rented room above the saloon, Eve washed the blood from her arm and stitched the shallow graze carefully. She examined the torn sleeve of her jacket and the ruined brim of her hat. Each mark told a story. Each scar reminded her that survival was not luck. It was preparation. Days later, as she prepared for the return journey, a small group of riders approached her in the stable yard. Deputies, and with them, a tall figure whose ribs were tightly bandaged beneath a dark coat. Marcus Calder. He had surrendered, not out of mercy, out of necessity. The rockfall had worsened his wound. Infection had set in. He had ridden into town under a white cloth, knowing death awaited him if untreated. As deputies led him past, his eyes found Eve's. "You could have killed me," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied. "Why didn't you?" She met his gaze steadily. "Because I wanted you to remember. Remember that the woman driving the carriage had not been prey. Remember that arrogance carried consequences." He gave a faint, humorless chuckle. "You shoot at full gallop like a cavalry ghost." She shrugged slightly. "You ambush the wrong carriage. You best be ready for surprises." As he was led away to a cell, Eve felt no triumph, only clarity. The frontier was changing. Railroads would soon cut across the land. Law would grow stronger. Men like Calder would fade. But skill, courage, and preparation would never lose value. When she mounted her horse the next morning, reins firm in her hands, she did not ride with fear of the road ahead. She rode knowing that whatever waited beyond the next bend, bandits, storms, or doubt, she would meet it head on. Because somewhere between the ranch outside San Antonio and the long trail to El Paso, she had learned a simple truth. Underestimate a woman at your own peril, especially one who can shoot at full gallop.